Okay, hello and welcome to this special session, a pre-Congress session of the ISOCARP World Planning Congress 2021, which is hosted by ITACUS, the ITA Committee of Underground Space Use. And we really want to talk to you and with you today about underground urbanism and why the next level up is down. So our session is called New Pathways Forward to a New Underground Urbanism. And we are very pleased to have a lot of planners here in the audience who are attending the ISOCARP Congress, but also from our network, from our panelists today. We have three special panelists from Australia, from Hong Kong, and from Flanders, Belgium. So the sequence of events will be that you will first hear from the ITACUS co-chair and myself, Shana DEBROCK and myself, some introductory remarks on the topic. What is underground urbanism all about? Why is it an important issue that planners shouldn't neglect and that planners should be aware of and that planners should see as a pathway forward in urbanism in general, in urban planning, and by looking especially at our cities from an underground perspective and how that can be integrated in our urban environments and why.
And
so we will have, yeah?
Sorry, I was just going to add on, Antonia, that after each of the presentations, there will be time for quick question and answers. We can use the chat feature to pose those questions, and at the end we will have some discussion, and then we'll try to get you all involved and ask you to raise your hands if you want to ask a question or comment on something. So the first part is kind of setting the stage, and then the second part we will go into interaction and hopefully have a nice dialogue on underground urbanism.
Correct. Thanks for adding that, Han. I also just got a chat message from the ISOCARP Secretary General Frank Thont that he's in the session. He will then need to jump into another session. But this is very much a joint session with ISOCARP, and we're very pleased to host this second cyber agora, as we call it, on underground urbanism, this one embedded within the ISOCARP World Planning Congress. We very much wanted to host it live from Doha, but because of the geographic breadth of our panelists and still unfortunately prevailing restrictions in terms of the pandemics, we decided to make this a virtual session. So let's introduce ourselves. I'm Antonia CORNARO. I'm an urban planner from Switzerland. And I am also the co-chair of the ITA Committee of Underground Space Use. I'm a lecturer on the planning of underground space use at the Federal Institute of Technology in Switzerland. And I work for AMBERG Engineering, an engineering firm dealing with the built environment in cities worldwide. Han, please introduce yourself.
I can, and I'm Han ADMIRAAL, a civil engineer by training. I work in the Netherlands, and as Antonia said, we both co-chair the ITA Committee on Underground Space. And this is where Antonia was going to say, underground space is our passion.
Yes, we do love underground space, and it is our passion, and we are a committee 100% dedicated to this.
And we believe that the underground offers as yet untapped potential.
And that is really what we want to put forward to you today in this very special session, as we also believe it can offer a major pathway forward.
Which is why we want to embrace what you see on your screen here, which was a part of a resolution at the last Urban Economy Forum. And our proposal today to you would be to recognize that these aims can also be achieved by looking at the potential underground space offers the city. And it's indeed a potential that goes wider than just creating physical space. It can also include energy and drinking water resources. But let's start by taking a look at how we're already using the subsurface. Now, this is the Lust Plateau in China, where people have been living for thousands of years.
And they do this in traditional yaodongs. They're basically dwellings cut into the subsurface or sideways into the hills. And they're lived in since ancient times until nowadays. So conceptually, any underground space we create nowadays follows this idea of the yaodong.
And a good example of this is this underground school extension in the Netherlands. It is a modern day equivalent, you could say, utilizing underground space where development at the surface is no longer possible.
So contemporary thinking on the use of the subsurface can actually trace back to Georges-Eugène Haussmann from Paris from the beginning of the 19th century, who actually saw the subsurface as the ideal service layer for cities.
And Hénard, a French architect, proposed a similar idea to be used under the Paris streets. But we challenge that concept, and we see a use of the subsurface that goes way beyond that concept of using it for these kind of utilities, for example.
So it's really a pitfall we must avoid at all costs. We should not just regard the subsurface as an urban service layer, because it's not just about getting rid of urban blights and burying them underground and hiding them below the surface. So let's steer away from the urban service layer. The subsurface does not just serve the city, it's an integral part of the city. And as such, its development should aim at integrating this new tissue into the existing urban fabric. That's where urban planning kicks in. And we need to move from the service layer towards an underground urbanism.
This is an interesting example from the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. It's basically a sunken shopping street, as you can see. And it's been designed in such a way, you can see the trees that are planted there. It's designed in such a way that when people are using it, they actually give no thought whether they are above or below or at the surface.
Here's a fab example from Paris, from Farshid Moussawi architects, and their vision on the underground station of the future, combining uses and integrating surface and subsurface in a natural and flowing way with various levels.
So when we talk about creating a new urban tissue, it is more than just developing underground spaces. It requires public accessible spaces, and it must be designed to allow contemporary spaces to act as public spaces, even if they are privately owned and operated.
So here, for instance, we have Place des Jardins in Montreal, Canada, and it's a prime example of linking basement developments and metro stations while using publicly accessible urban corridors. It does, however, bring up the question of public versus private space, of ownership and inclusivity. Are these spaces really open for 24 hours? Or are they empty and deserted and no longer available after office hours and when shops and the metro close?
So planning and design form the basis for the development of a new urban underground tissue. And leaving the development unchecked and subject to the whims of private developers and owners can in the long term only lead to a less desirable result.
So there are caveats to all this that we need to recognize. Firstly, there's a real competition for underground space already taking place. It's sort of first come, first served basis.
Secondly, we sometimes are oblivious to this or to what our urban underground space really consists of.
And thirdly, depending on the geology, the subsurface offers an ecosystem services that need protection.
So it's therefore very much a case of, do we exploit the subsurface or do we protect it? This is the largest industrial complex in the Netherlands, trapped in time and space below the surface. These are the former mines in the south of my country, and they are closed off and only used on a small scale as aquathermal energy source. But at the same time, they pose a risk from collapse of shafts or galleries, even more so if no one is aware that this is hiding below the surface. Planned more carefully at the time of closure, multiple opportunities could have been identified for future use, ranging from recreational adventure spaces to underground food production.
So here we see a vision and insight and data, and that illustrates the need to foremost collect data to create insights into the subsurface, which then enables the creation of a vision on how to best use urban underground space, or indeed on where we must not develop to prevent destroying ecosystem services or other vital natural resources and processes that take place below the surface of cities. So we therefore urge you to plan the use of underground space, to regulate the use of underground space, and above all, to start discovering what lies below in your city and what opportunities it offers. Even if you have no intention of developing, knowing what is below your feet should be part of your city's resilience strategy.
Thank you for your attention. It was just a short introduction to the topic of this afternoon, and you're obviously feel free to contact us if you want to know more, and also just a quick pitch of the book which Antonia, CORNARO and I wrote, called Underground Spaces: Unveiled, Planning and Creating the Cities of the Future. A lot of the things that we just mentioned here in this short introduction can be found more in detail in the book. And also those QR codes you can use to navigate to the ITACUS web pages or to the Think Deep website, which holds more information on the book and its content. So,
thanks, Han. And this brings us to actually kick off the session and to actually invite our panelists to speak. I'm also seeing that people are putting in questions and comments in the chat, which is very welcome because we'll pick these up in the Q&As after each panelist and also in the final discussion round. So now it's very much my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Marilu Melo, ZURITA. She's a Mexican urban geographer residing in Sydney. She is a human geographer and she works for Northwestern University as a lecturer. And Marilu will be presenting on repairing memory loss, an Indigenous-led approach to urban water design. Go ahead, Marilu.
Thanks, Hannah and Antonia. I'm gonna share my screen now. I always get it wrong, so you might see my notes, but hopefully it's all good. Just let me know. Can you see it there?
All good. Yes.
Perfect. Okay, I'm just gonna minimize the videos. Perfect. Okay, I cannot see your videos, but let me know if you have any questions. Turn your microphones on, put your hands up, whatever you want, if you want to talk to me while I'm presenting. Okay. So as Antonia said, my name is Marilu Melo, and I'm a senior lecturer. I'm a human geographer, which means that I'm a social scientist, an academic that does research about subterranean spaces. I want to thank Hannah and Antonia and Mahak for organizing this session and for inviting me to present today as part of the pre-Congress sessions. The ISOCARP theme for this year is Planning Unlocked, New Times, Better Places, Stronger Communities. And I think as a session about underground, this space fits very well with the current framing of the Congress. The 5 tracks that underpin the Congress are inclusiveness and empowerment, well-being and health, smartness and development, resilience and adaptability, and uniqueness and connectivity. So I think all these tracks, the 5 tracks, touch on underground spaces in different ways. And I think thinking with, planning with, and certainly living with undergrounds as the core of our thinking and our planning is very important, as Hannah and Antonia mentioned before. So before I go into topic, I want to acknowledge that today I am going to give a presentation based on 2 different projects that I have been involved in. The first one, as Antonia mentioned, is titled Repairing Memory and Place, an Indigenous-led approach to urban water design. This project is led by the Bungaroo, who are the traditional owners of the lands, waters, and undergrounds of Southeast Melbourne in Australia. And what you can see on the screen there is 2 maps of this region. A bay that was inundated at a time and it receded its waters and it created this space currently now in Melbourne. But the memory of the place remained in the Bungaroo, the Indigenous traditional owners of these spaces, the memories of bodies of water, of wetlands, and all those memories are shared through storytelling of events that happened thousands of years ago, of memories of water. All those bodies of water are now underground. And what we are collaborating with all those different partners that you see there on the screen is about remembering, reconnecting the memory of those bodies of water that now are under concrete and unseen for most of us, but that remain very much as an important part of the identity and memory of the Bungaroo. So this project integrates the undergrounds as a very important space that contains all this heritage, right? How are we going about this project? Well, we're overlaying historical maps with other spatial information, with current information that we have about the site, right? We know that the site inundates nowadays, so we can connect those bodies of water that exist underground and how they come to the surface and connect us in multiple ways. We're sharing spatial data, different sets between partners and researchers. So there is a group of stakeholders involved in the management of the bay. And all of them have come to the conversation to help us think about what is possible. How can we actually connect those memories with what is currently happening on the surface? We're sharing historical documents between partners and researchers. And we're sharing other types of data and information. So this map that you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen is actually a walking map with the Bungaroo elders, that they are walking the paths where they remember these bodies of water, where the stories are telling there was creeks and other types of interactions with water through the city. So all these maps will be exhibited. We're going to have an exhibition at the end of the year. This is a 4-year project and it's just started. The second project that is informing my presentation today is titled Under, Geosystem Services Underneath for Sustainable Communities and Improve Spatial Planning Practices. This is a collaboration with multiple universities in Sweden, but also with the Geological Survey of Sweden, and is sponsored by Formas, which is the Sustainable Council for Sweden. So what are we looking in this project? Well, this is a case study driven project. So we're looking at around 4 different case studies. And the intention is to develop a framework for systematic and structured consideration of geosystem services. And I'm going to be defining what geosystem services is if you are not familiar with this concept. But Antonia in her presentation was talking about ecosystem services, right? So think about what geosystem services can bring to a conversation. And I saw that Nikolai is in the audience there, an expert in geosystem services as well. So geosystem services have become important in planning practices, and they can support, if we understand them, the transformation of sustainable cities and communities. So what are the objectives or the aims of the project? I'm not going to go into much detail, but we're trying to identify and map the associated societal values that these geosystem services have, right? So if we identify a geosystem service, what are the societal values that come attached to it? We're trying to assess those societal values, like what are the impacts in terms of generations, in terms of impact across diversity of communities, what are the opportunities that we have? And we're trying to identify structures of governance. So what aspects of the governance of the different layers of government and the other actors that come into the planning and the thinking about the city? What are the roles when it comes to geosystem services, right? And I know I haven't defined them, so I'm going to do that in a bit. And finally, we're trying to create a participative learning environment, you know, to extend this idea of geosystem services beyond the length of the project or the duration of the project, and to create transformative processes in planning practice that consider geosystem services. So as you can see, both projects are about subterranean spaces governance, and both depart from a very different point of view. One is trying to repair those memories of landscapes and waterscapes that through colonization were buried under the concrete, putting water bodies away and radically transforming life and livelihoods. The other project is trying to create a tool to help identify the values that, if not counted today in urban development, might get lost and therefore impact future generations. As I mentioned before, I certainly cannot go in detail about these projects, but I would like us to think with both of them to show you the relevance of thinking with the subsurface as an essential space for urban planning, but also as part of our radical reconciliation with socio-ecological systems. So in a way, the title of the presentation is Geoethics and Geosystem Services, a Framework for Subsurface Governance. And I will start trying to engage with the idea of geoethics. I want us to think about, how geoethics can help us plan for subsurface management and uses. So there is a lot of geographical scholarship in urban undergrounds at the moment. And this body of work is mainly paying attention to the already created spaces underground, the tunnels, the underground parking spaces, the transport hubs. But this body of work, I would argue, could also pay attention to the diversity of underground spaces before construction, before transformation. Geoethics, in a sense, right? So these undergrounds, even if considered, sometimes they are depicted as devoid of life, absence of life, right? Like there is nothing happening there. And I would argue that we need to challenge this. We need to understand that these spaces support life in many ways, even if we define them as abiotic or absent of life, they support so many life systems that we need to consider. So a subterranean geoheritage, in a way, thinking about the legacies of these spaces for the future. Urban undergrounds contain numerous geological features, as we know, and all of them have significant cultural, social, educational, scientific, and aesthetic values. Undergrounds are as diverse as the surface under which they exist. In fact, such diversity is intrinsically linked to the undergrounds. So in these subterranean layers, there are beings that could call these spaces home, from subterranean fauna to microbes that reside deep inside the earth. There is a volumetric diversity. Sometimes these subterranean non-humans can be less than charismatic. To be honest, we don't like them that much at times, right? But much of the worlds and lives of subterranean non-humans lie beyond the tropes of surface social lives of what is and looks familiar to us. They're radically different. Let's think for a moment about the Sustainable Development Goals. 17 goals and 169 targets. And how many of them consider the abiotic world explicitly? How many of those targets actually include things that are consider as absent of life. I think there is room for us as planners and thinkers of the underground and of the urban, obviously, to expand our frames and include those systems that sustain our everyday life and challenge notions of emptiness and sameness. Geoethics might give us the chance to connect what we humans tend to perceive as absent of life as essential for life, and especially essential for urban life. This framing would help understand the value of planning for an underground development in terms of how much benefit is bringing to the urban, but also if they are to be transformed and unveiled their full potential, it is important to consider the social and environmental elements. So for me, geoethics is a practice, as a practice, it's about sense making and acting. It acts based on information, it's knowledge based, right? But it's not the scientific knowledge that is top down. It includes all sorts of knowledges, like in the Bungurung case, we're connecting with a multiplicity of knowledges that are very ancient knowledge, right? That are brought into the conversation about what used to be, what it still is, even if it is on the ground. So the interventions of the agents are nourished by these insights, by these multiple knowledges into the environmental, technological, and social components that actually form and help us understand the underground. So that, for me, geoethics will help us think about geosystem services as that kind of like element of the second project that I mentioned before. And geosystem services definition, I kept it a little bit too late for you with the intention of actually challenging what we understand of the world as essential for our living. Right? So geosystem services are benefits derived by humans from the subsurface. The use of the subsurface to build and construct in and on groundwater, energy, material extraction, storing, for example, water energy and carbon dioxide, provide habitats for ecosystem and support for surface life. And also they serve as archives of cultural and geological heritage. So as you can see, geosystem services is a human-centered definition that identifies all these different elements that can come from the subsurface, right? And support our life in many important ways. So thinking with geoethics and geosystem services, for me, can give us a framework that actually can provide us with important insights about intergenerational justice, like in the case of the Bungurung, the knowledges that remain underground are important to keep and record for future generations, to share that knowledge of what happened thousands of years ago. It helps repair memory and the relations that were fractured by historical processes. It considers what best uses, current, but also future can have. It talks about what, Hannah and Antonia said in their presentation, what is the best option with this space that is already transformed? What can we do with it? It will consider the absence of life, the abiotic worlds that sustain the biotic, right? Including humans, or mainly humans if you want. It is context specific. These things cannot be generalized. They need to include that specificity that comes with the context. And at the end, what we want to do is to create practical tools that will help us plan urban planning that considers these underground spaces. I think this is the end of my presentation, but before I go, I just want you to share, if you are in Australia or if you are interested in subterranean geographies in Australia, we're going to have a symposium in February, and we would really like to see you. The link is there in the presentation, and I'll put it in the chat in just a minute. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Wow, a big applause to Marilu Melo from Sydney. A deep dive, eye-opening take on the urban underground, says Frank Tond. And please share your upcoming publications with the audience, with this circle of newfound urban underground enthusiasts and connoisseurs and experts. We're opening the floor to questions. Mahak, have there been questions put forward to Marilu?
I do not see any questions. I see a comment from Nikolai. He thanks Marilu for talking about geosystem services. and covering the intangible perspectives as well. I do not see any question, but if I may ask a question to Marilu, is so you mentioned the ethical framework for subsurface planning, that one of the key components would be intergenerational justice. And I was wondering, from your project, which tries to strike a balance between exploitation, exploration, and preservation of water bodies that are no more visible, what are the challenges from an intergenerational perspective when it comes to striking that balance between preservation and exploration?
Thanks, Mahak. That's the question, right? Like we need to have developments. We need to keep the cities going and providing services for the millions of people that live in the urban space. I think listening to the voices that are very loudly speaking and saying what is needed is important. In the case of the Bungurun, they are keen to help design. They're keen to be involved in decision-making processes about the water bodies. So I think there is an opportunity here for us sometimes to be quiet and start listening to what other people have to say and just learn, right? But that obviously needs to be followed up with actions. It needs to be followed up with policy changes and with attention to the things that matter, like water, for example.
That's really helpful. Listening before speaking is, yes, something that's very much needed. We'll take one last question. I see Nikolai raising his hand if he could speak and ask the question to Marilu.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Mahak. Marilu, thank you for inspirational talk. The question is about sustainable development goals and geosystem services. In geosystem services, we do have some culture and intangibles, and it's specifically written by de Groot and de Mulder, other authors, and Van Rie, and so on. So we have. But in sustainable development goals, we don't have anything on culture. And so what do you think? Because the sustainable development goals are until 2030, and then we are talking about urbanization and more role underground space and three-dimensional planning to play in general. And would that be appropriate to have this link through goal 11, for example? Or should it be a separate something kind of additions for culture, for sustainable development? And then underground space is a big play in this, as I guess. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikolai. And I saw that you put there about your new publication coming up. So please share with us when that's ready. A very important question as well, right? Like there are aspects missing from the SDGs, and they were from the MDGs in the past. So there's also considerations for expansion. I think the voices that are coming through about decolonizing, indigenizing the urban space are really important, and we need to listen to those ones. And those ones need to be integrated into the international thinking about, long-term planning and future. Again, like this space that I'm taking, maybe an Indigenous person would be much better in coming and talking about this and occupying this space, which is very important, right? So I think, yes, it's connected to the same, it's connected to this idea of intergenerational justice, of acknowledging that there is multiple types of knowledges and they need to come together into the planning.
So thanks so much again, Marilu. We will also have more opportunity to take this forward. All these thoughts that you raised in your inspirational and very deep diving talk. And Han, can you introduce our next panelist, please?
Yeah, we'll do that. And also, Marilu, thank you for your inspirational talk. I think when we really want to start a dialogue within ISOCARP and underground urbanism, this certainly is making the case for what we need to look at and how we can do it and move away from an engineering driven development towards a more planned development. So thank you also on my behalf. Our next speaker is Tony Ho. Tony is someone Antonia and I already know for a long time. He is also a member of the advisory board of ITACUS. Tony works for the government of Hong Kong, first within the Geotechnical division, and he's moved on now to the Development Bureau, but he is also, like a lot of us, passionate about the subsurface, about underground space. Tony, go ahead with your presentation.
Thanks, Han and Antonio. So I just share my screen first. Okay. Right. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Nice to meet you all through the virtual platform. Today, I would like to share with you Hong Kong's experience in respect of how we use underground space to facilitate sustainable urban development. Given that the focus of this section is on planning, I will highlight its importance during my presentation. Let me say hello again from Hong Kong. If you have been here before, you will find this is a wonderful city with beautiful scenery, nice harbor, and greenery mountains for enjoyment. On another angle, we are indeed of no difference compared to other well-developed cities. In urban areas, we have densely built environment and limited land resources. We are facing traffic congestion and pedestrian overcrowding every day, in particular during peak hours, not just above ground, but also below ground. We encounter the same congestion problems. During wet and typhoon seasons, our city is prone to the risk of flooding, landslides, etc. And to tackle these urban problems, Hong Kong has long been adopting underground space in terms of space creation, connectivity enhancement, including for traffic and pedestrians, infrastructure reorganization, and improvement of city resilience. Amongst all, talking about the key drivers in recent years, perhaps the land supply issues has driven us to explore wider application of underground space in Hong Kong. As you may know, Hong Kong is a hilly city with more than 2/3 of the land covered by the natural terrain. All the urban areas has been densely developed, and there is a pressing need for us to explore other innovative means to expand our land resources. Luckily, our hilly terrain with strong walk offers an excellent geological setting, which is favorable for cavern development. Hence, if we consider landmass not just from a 2D, but from 3D perspective, there is indeed a wealth of hidden land resources that we can identify. In particular, along the urban fringe, where there are already well-established roads and infrastructure networks, if we can construct rock caverns by digging horizontally into the hillside, we can create a lot of usable solution space. By housing suitable facilities in this solution space, we can free up more surface land for other higher value or beneficial uses. And in view of this, we have formulated a territory-wide cavern master plan for Hong Kong. The cavern master plan provides an underground space planning tool to guide and facilitate cavern development in the territory. The idea is that when a project proponent wants to adopt caverns in their projects, they can easily find suitable locations with relevant supporting information for their consideration. To sum up, the above 3D land use approach is a clear demonstration of how we can turn constraints into opportunities and best use different land resources to meet the needs of our city. In addition to the cavern master plan, we have launched a suite of measures and formulate a get the ball rolling strategy so as to create a sustained momentum for wider use of rock cavern developments in Hong Kong. And through various means, we want to make a breakthrough in various aspects. instead of being passively driven by individual projects. We formulate a high-level sustained policy to steer the whole city's walk cavern development. We also develop strategic planning tools, for example, the cavern master plan, to formulate wider applications of cavern development. And we aimed to move from just NIMBY uses to other versatile uses. For example, underground quarry, laboratory, archive, data center, warehouse, etc., where we can see examples in other countries. We also want to extend from mainly public uses to cover also private sector applications. Over the past few years, we have launched a number of cavern projects, and they are now under various development stages. A signature example, as some of you may know, is to relocate a large sewage treatment works to caverns, thereby releasing a 28 hectare of surface land for housing other uses. This project is now in construction stage, and the new cavern facility will be completed in around 2029. And we also have other new cavern projects in the pipeline. For example, water treatment works, material testing laboratories, archives, and underground quarry. And in urban areas, we also widely adopt underground space for various applications, just like other cities. You may be familiar with these examples: tunnels, subways, metro stations, car parks, retail, and various recreational facilities. Not just this, as I mentioned before, we have also employed underground space solutions to improve the city resilience. For example, we have built a number of stormwater storage tanks to reduce the flooding risk of low-lying districts. Similar underground facilities can also be found in other countries, such as Japan. And we have also built an innovative underground facilities for mitigating landslide risks. These facilities consist of 2 tunnels with a network of sub-horizontal drains for the purpose of regulating the groundwater regime at the mid-level area, thereby reduce large-scale landslide hazard of the hillside. And recently, we have revamped this facility as a science and technology education center. We regularly organize visits for schools, universities, learned society, and general public, showing them different smart and innovative technologies that we employ to build and operate these facilities so as to mitigate landslide risk. We also use this example to elaborate the importance of climate change and our preparedness to combat the challenges. And this is a key example of how we can turn an existing underground space for multifunction uses that can benefit the general public to a great extent. And above is a quick glance of various underground space applications in Hong Kong. I would like to highlight a few points to summarize our experience or observations. First, underground space should be developed with clear purpose. It takes time for development, and once developed, it may not be easily modified or reconstructed like surface development. Hence, a forward and holistic planning is very important. Talking about daily applications, peoples are mostly the chief beneficiary or end users, and therefore we should bear this in mind in both planning and design process. And even if we develop an underground space in a small area, we should consider how it can integrate better with nearby wider area so as to bring synergy effect, and not just horizontally, but vertically, as underground space forms part of landmass in 3D perspective. And we should always adopt an integrated planning approach by considering the synergy of both surface and underground development together. Furthermore, we should consider whether we can allow flexibility for wider applications, expansion or extension of underground space in the future. If not planned properly, such long-term potential will be gone easily. And lastly, there's no shortcut. It usually takes a long time to gradually create a coherent and well-connected underground space network. And in this regard, I would reiterate the importance of a comprehensive planning to unlock the full potential of underground space for sustainable city development. So I think time's up, and let me finish my presentation here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony, for your presentation. I think we can take some questions from those watching. Does anybody have a question for Tony? Mahak, do you have anything in the chat?
I do not see anything in chat or in the raised hands question, but if anybody has a question, we can take it up right.
I don't see anyone yet. In the meantime, Tony, I have a question. When you were preparing your master plan, can you tell us something about how you involved the general public into the whole process?
Well, I think Han has raised a very good question. Well, actually, one important task that when we implement underground space is to get the public engagement involved in the whole process. And as it is one of the city's development, actually, we really need public support if we really want to put forward this kind of project. And hence, as you can anticipate, well, actually, if we formulate a CAFE master plan for the whole city, we have to get the public buy-in of this concept. And therefore, during the whole process, we have different public engagement activity. For example, we go to different we have many meetings with different professional bodies, including planner, engineer, surveyor, different discipline, to explain why underground space, well, in our city is important to better use it, these resources, and also why, and also how it can bring benefit to the whole city. Besides the professionals, we also need, for example, different government department to buy in as well, because well, it is the cultural change. Because well, in the traditional city development, in particular, if we have plenty of surface land for our usage, well, I think people will just take the easy way to develop their project. For example, if they have sewage treatment work, which is a kind of limbing facility, well, they will easily think we'll just build the those limbing thing on surface land without considering how the benefit of putting this kind of facility underground. And therefore, we have to spend time to explain to them. And also, we have organized many public engagement activity, including the exhibition, the discussion forum, as well as the visit to those real underground facility, just to show them how we can better use underground space to bring benefit to the environment, or different advantage that we can bring to the city. So and therefore, I think for this part we have spent a lot of work, and I fully agree that, well, actually it is an important element of the job that we must do when the whole city move, well, towards this kind of planning concept.
Okay, thank you, Tony, for that answer. Quite rightly, I think you pointed out the importance of public engagement. Let's move on now, and I hand over to Antonia again.
Thanks a lot, Han, and thanks, Tony, because it's really very interesting to see what the city of Hong Kong is thinking in terms of exploitation and optimization of using the underground space and in its urban core, but also in its caverns. Now we have the pleasure to moving on to our final and third speaker, Shana DEBROCK. Shana DEBROCK is a policy officer of urban planning in Flanders, which is a part of Belgium, which most of you I'm sure know, but the ones who don't, I'm pointing it out. And she's also a PhD candidate at the University of Antwerp. And she's very much set on getting Flanders into planning its subsurface. So let's hear all about this, Shana.
Hi, thank you, Antonia. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Okay, almost there. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I am Shana DEBROCK, like Antonia mentioned, and I am an urban planner and I work at the Department of Environment and Spatial Development in Flanders and the Faculty of Design Sciences at the University of Antwerp. I am happy to present some insight into the onset of urban planning, of urban underground planning in Flanders. So Flanders is one of 3 regions of Belgium. It occupies the northern part of Belgium. You see the dark green area, and it is one of the most densely populated regions of Europe. Belgium may have a high overall density, but it is characterized by extensive urban sprawl. Data from 2016 shows that Belgium is the runner-up champion on urban sprawl in Europe. Flanders is also characterized by what we call ribbon developments, houses that cut through open space. So it faces many challenges. 33% of the surface is considered settlement area and 14% of its surface is effective soil sealed area. This is amongst the highest in Europe. Every day, an average of 6 hectares of land take is taking place. That leads, amongst other things, to heat stress, flooding, and puts pressure on the open space. I was just wondering, do you see my whole presentation or just do you also see the speaker?
No, we just see the presentation.
Okay, excellent. So that's why in 2018, a strategic vision on urban planning in Flanders was approved by the Flemish government. The planning policy shifted from a more traditional planning towards a place-based planning. The new planning vision intends to bring urban sprawl to a standstill by lowering the daily land take from 6 hectares to 0 by 2040. The plan aims at lowering the daily land take by increasing the density on already developed land by applying densification development strategies such as intensification, reuse, temporary use, and mixed use of space combined with stimulating nodal development. So the policy plan does mention the use of the subsurface as a means for increasing density, but it does not elaborate. Actually, urban underground space was barely noticeable in Flemish urban planning policy. So parallel to the development of the policy plan, the government instigated 2 policy explorations regarding urban underground space use and planning. The main objective of the first policy exploration on urban underground space was to examine if efficient use of urban underground space could be a viable solution for lowering the daily land take and fulfilling Flemish policy objectives on spatial efficiency. And the second one focuses on methodologies for integrating urban underground in urban planning policies, instruments, and processes. So when we explored the possibilities for urban underground space use in Flanders, we found that although Flanders holds some good examples of urban underground space, they are rather scarce. Today, more and more functions and users are taking control of the subsurface in Flanders. So the increasing pressure on the subsurface, combined with the fact that there is actually no accurate knowledge about the whereabouts of underground structures, this sometimes leads to accidents. We had several workshops and bilateral discussions with stakeholders. and revealed and confirmed the fact that Flanders is characterized by a scattered policy landscape on underground developments. There is no management of urban underground space, no regulatory framework, and even no clear ownership legislation. So this leads to the following practices in urban underground space use, which we can also see on a worldwide scale. Ad hoc and first come, first serve developments, last resort practice, sectoral approaches, and applying 2D views on urban underground spaces. These practices led to the current state of urban underground space in Flanders, a spaghetti subsurface characterized by use, conflict, and competition, incidents, solitary developments lacking in relationships with the surface, and most important, missed opportunities. During the policy exploration, case studies worldwide have been scanned, and their relevance for the Flemish setting was assessed in order to understand the societal and urban benefits of urban underground space use, specifically for Flanders. It was revealed that the added value of the urban underground in Flanders goes beyond increasing urban densities or accommodating population growth. Urban underground space could also help increase the amount of green spaces in urban centers. It can be a part of the solution to societal and environmental challenges. And it can also enhance territorial identity, and urban underground space can even serve as an economic catalyst. The case study research also laid bare urban opportunities for underground space use. The participants in the workshops identified 4 opportunities for urban underground space use within the redevelopment of Flemish cities, such as the combination of redeveloping an urban area while safeguarding landscape values, opportunities for extensions of buildings, reusing abandoned underground spaces, and displaying archaeological finds. It became very clear that a lack of policy for and planning of the subsurface led to misguided urban underground space practices, which resulted in an unsustainable use of urban underground space in Flanders. Yet simultaneously, it was also established that using the urban underground has several benefits and urban opportunities can be found, which can support the fulfillment of the policy objective of increasing densities. So it became pertinent that Flanders develops policy on urban underground space use that considers issues such as suitable location, desirable functions, suitable depth, impact of geological, hydrological, archaeological characteristics, and requirements for using urban underground space. This all in order to acquire a sustainable use or even non-use of urban underground space. However, in order to achieve sustainable use of urban underground space, policy ought to be firmly integrated in the Flemish urban planning system. So in 2019, the policy recommendations were discussed with policy officers and government officials in an attempt to be placed on the political agenda of the newly elected regional government, which succeeded. The policy document on environment and spatial development 2019-2024, submitted by Zuhal Demir, Flemish Minister on Environment and Spatial Development, it includes a strategic objective regarding the use of the subsurface, stating the need for policy regarding efficient use of urban underground space. So as a result of the policy exploration, the government has currently embarked on urban underground space initiatives. We carry this out in collaboration with urban underground and urban planning experts. This to transition from unsustainable urban underground space to sustainable planning of urban undergrounds, which implies balancing the assets and services that the subsurface holds, such as constructive space, water, energy potential, and eco or geosystem services. So Flanders has embarked on a journey on urban underground space use and instigated about 20 different initiatives. We consulted several experts for advice on urban underground space issues, such as geological, geotechnical advice, advice on ownership issues, real estate, financial advice, even behavioral and psychological advice on urban underground space usage, and an advice on the possible impact of urban underground spaces on ecosystem services. We also compiled a collection of good practices on urban underground space use worldwide, which includes a lot from Hong Kong, Tony, and we did a benchmarking study on planning instruments that are used to plan the subsurface all around the world, like master planning, for example. We're also currently working on a regional suitability map for urban underground space use that points out areas in Flanders that have extra potential for urban underground space use, as in constructing urban underground spaces. We're also involved in an experimental design study on 6 cases in Flanders and the Netherlands, and we have detected specific fields where urban underground space use could offer added value to society. We mapped out potential urban locations, such as brownfields. We summarized urban design tips for urban designers and planners. And we are still trying to get a grip on the sustainability aspect of urban underground space use. And we have conducted a brief study on how to better visualize the subsurface in planning instruments, who are mostly 2D, while the subsurface could benefit from 3D visualization. So also in collaboration with the Dutch University TU Delft, we researched how to integrate the subsurface into zoning plans. We also took a look at how to integrate urban underground space in area development and how to integrate it into local planning policies, not the regional one of Flanders, but the local planning policies. This is still ongoing. We're actually trying to set up a planning framework for sustainable urban underground space use. This should offer an array of considerations when using the subsurface in a sustainable manner. To conclude, we are getting our multidisciplinary network of urban underground space experts and planning experts involved and are expanding or highlighting our database with data on the geological aspects of the subsurface in Flanders. We're actually trying to see how this geological and geotechnical data could be used for urban underground space projects and how it can be translated for urban planning, urban planners. So our end game is to develop a coherent, scientifically sound strategy for urban underground space use, supported by a framework of planning factors to establish sustainable integrated planning of urban underground space in order to balance sustainable use of urban underground while developing sustainable projects. So this concludes my presentation on the onset of urban underground planning in Flanders. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions or just ask them now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Shana DEBROCK. That was a really comprehensive overview and insight into what Flanders has set out to do. I'm sad that Frank Tond is no longer here because he had to jump to another session because he is from Flanders originally. He would have been quite intrigued to discover what you've really unveiled there and what you've found out and analyzed. And we're opening the floor to questions and comments regarding Shana's presentation.
Thank you very much, Shana, once again for your presentation. I see Nikolai raising his hand for a question. If Nikolai could unmute himself and ask the question.
Yeah, thanks. This is a very interesting event today, really. Thank you for holding it. And Shana, again, great presentation. And I'm interested in the component you mentioned, behavior advice. And, you know, there is kind of a movement or a working stream, transitions, sustainability transitions. So it's a big thing in Europe. How do we do transition from one state to another? And in this case, I think in underground space, if we are to have these transitions to a more sustainable underground space use, then is it institutional or what was meant in this kind of behavior advice, or is it limited just to how do people behave in underground spaces? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Nikolai. It was one of several expert advices that we did when we were trying to know what kind of added value intensive use of urban underground space could hold for Flanders. And we started talking to people about using urban underground space. Most people, I don't need to mention this because you're an expert, but most people react as no urban underground space, it's dark. And are you talking about sewage? Are you talking about parking spaces? And it had a very negative connotation about it. And people weren't always that eager to use functions that were below ground. We see, for example, in several stations in Flanders, level -2 and -3, when there are functions there like shops, they are not really used a lot. So we see some kind of reluctance to go on a behavioral scale to go into urban underground functions. And this expert advice was done by I think it was an anthropologist who tried to find out some key aspects why this was going on, and he tried to sum up several recommendations on how to shift this view from this viewpoint of several people, which consists of sensibilizing people, better communications, also showing lots of good practices and a whole bunch of design tips on how urban underground spaces could be designed more qualitatively to increase life on the subsurface and the surface. Okay, I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes.
Any other comments or questions for Shana?
I don't see anything. There's one comment from George Penn. He mentioned that the need for creating an independent ecosystem underground is imperative, and he's all for it. But it was mentioned that no legislation, no framework, no governance until 2019 in Flanders. If you to comment on that.
Where there was, there's no specific legislation on urban underground space planning or urban underground space use. You have several guidelines for geotechnical engineers, but there wasn't really a specific legislation or governance on how to use the subsurface. So we had a lot of opportunities that were missed because of the lack of policy and the lack of concrete guidelines for urban underground space use. And we even had several conflicts because there is no accurate knowledge about what is already constructed in the urban underground, what spaces, what physical spaces do already exist. And when we want to create an underground urbanism, knowing where these spaces are and how they can be connected to each other and how they can be connected to the surface is very important, because otherwise you won't be able to create a dynamic urbanism that considers subsurface and surface. So it did have some kind of impact on how the subsurface was being developed up until now.
Okay, thank you, Shana, for that. Just staying with you, I was just wondering, you used the word framework in the sense that you want to develop a comprehensive framework. Listening to Marilu at the same time, she talks about a framework as well. I'm just wondering if you two could actually reflect on each other's search for a framework. Marilu, how do you think could Shana benefit from the ideas that you posed to us today?
Sorry, the microphone was up there. Yeah, certainly. I was thinking about a similar thing because we're looking for tools, right? Like we're actually looking for tools that can be embedded into current practices of governance. But the interesting part of Shana's presentation is that it's actually bringing already this diversity of voices into the tool, right? So before they try to even design the tool, they are actually engaging with a diversity of knowledges, ways of living and experiencing the urban, and bringing them into conversation to create a tool. So it's a really interesting, place-making methodology, which helps a lot, right? I think from your presentation, Shana, what really makes me think about the challenges of bringing into conversation all these voices is that at some point we need to take tough decisions, right? And tough decisions are sometimes we need to sacrifice, including some aspects, and just moving forward. So I think in developing a framework, that for me would be the most challenging thing, to actually decide what are the boundaries, right? Like, what are the limits? And I don't know if in this process you encountered that, because I certainly encountered in the framework that I'm thinking with and proposing.
Well, that's actually spot on, Marilu. That's actually the hardest thing now about trying to develop a framework, because we took such a broad perspective, and we did include archaeologists and hydrogeologists and psychologists, and this whole bunch of network of people has different views on how to use the subsurface or not use the subsurface. So when we're trying to create this framework too, it's even going to be grounded in transition theories. So this has something to do with what Nikolai said. So how to transition to sustainable underground urbanism, how to use it sustainably. We will actually have to make some kind of tough decisions, like you said, and we're also going to have to focus our framework. And I was actually hoping that the concept of geosystem services could be helpful in that quest. So I think it would be helpful if we had some more conversation about it, because I do believe that the concept of geosystem services would be very helpful in trying to determine and balancing all the geosystem services in the subsurface, and how to choose which one is better used at a certain place, because they sometimes conflict each other. So that's why planning is very important, and there is a very strong need for such a planning framework. So I'm actually hoping that this framework could be integrated and designed in a holistic way, so it can also be it can be generic enough to be put on each different planning system, and not just serve for Flanders, but consist of several planning factors that can contribute to the diversity in planning systems. But we still need to talk about geosystem services, because I think it will be very helpful for our framework.
Yeah, and I think not just the geosystem services. I think the whole concept of geoethics is something which I found very interesting as well, because it seems to be something that can actually help us connect this whole question of do we exploit the subsurface for certain purposes, or do we want to preserve it because it has so many other values for humanity that we would destroy those by going below the surface. And I think this comes down to the way that we actually observe the subsurface. And in a way, you use the word charismatic, Marilu. I think that we can all say, and maybe Tony can comment on this, that the subsurface is, by a lot of people, is not seen as something that is quite charismatic. You know, it's often associated with negative feelings and negative thoughts. I mean, Shana, you mentioned it just now when you answered Nikolai as well. Tony, can you comment on this in Hong Kong when you did these public engagements? How did people observe the subsurface? Was it something that frightens them, or is it something that they welcomed?
Well, when I listened to Sarah's presentation, I have similar experience before, honestly. well, well, Hong Kong experienced the same. We have, nothing to drive. Started from nothing to drive, just individual project, individual developer or project proponent to think, well, it is good to use underground space. Then after finish that project, well, no continual things happen. Well, we start from that. We start from that beginning, and therefore we have experienced all the same thing. When talking about planning, well, we have experienced the whole process. Well, we just identify which professional discipline are involved. I fully agree that it is a multidisciplinary subject. Well, it's not just engineering. It's also planning. It's also traffic. It's also the environmentalist, and also the other geographic. I fully agree that, well, all are involved in this. We call it underground urbanism. And well, if you ask me, what we have experienced, I can tell you that in the beginning, we also found that many people in Hong Kong, well, they don't know what underground is. But luckily, when in Hong Kong we have a lot of underground shopping mall. So the concept is, well, we underground. When talking underground, well, positively they will refer to those underground shopping mall. But if we're talking about beyond the retail usage, then they will start to think, well, the underground space is dark, well, is something, well, they don't know what, well, what usage should be. And therefore, well, during the whole process, well, we, in order to educate, to do more education, we have spent a lot of time doing research, visiting different countries' experience, well. And luckily, we have many examples in different countries, well, including those, well, very, including many non-NIMBY usage. And therefore, well, with time, we have collect many information, and we have organized many different kind of public education, or the and through the media, or the through the internet. Well, we try to bring the well, the real situation. Well, what happens in other part of the world to the Hong Kong people, and gradually, with time, after they know more about, well, what is the international trend, and what actually, well, underground space, the benefit can be. Well, our people, well, start to, know more, and then they will give support to this kind of thing. But it takes time, really. So I think when we plan underground space, we do a lot of, well, what we call framework, planning framework. But equally important, I think, is the public engagement. The strategy of how we can engage people to buy in the concept is equally important, and worth spending time to do it. And luckily, we have ITACUS, we have ISOCARP, so we have a lot of supporters, well. And I do believe that with the expert, well, available in elsewhere, then we can easily do it. And one thing I just want to add is about the how, well, in a city's development, if we really want to use more underground space, of course, many people will think, well, it is government's job. I would not deny that, well, I would not disagree that, well, the top level support is very important. In particular, if we as the academic, we can do a lot of research, and then, we'll do a very good research project, and then, share with it to other people. But without, with the top government support, we are talking about the policy, then it's still, it is difficult to promote the concept, or to drive that area wider in the city's development. But on another perspective, I would like to add one more point. If using underground, we perceive this is an important area or important concept in the planning, well, because we are talking about planning. I think we equally important is we need to have the planner professional or the planner's professional to buy in the concept, to have this we so-called spatial planning, in mind. If we see the underground space as an integral part of the landmass, right? Antonio, you mentioned it. Well, I think it is very important because, in the city development, if the planner has already built in a concept of how, landmass can be it above ground or below ground, they are just the same thing in the 3D landmass. And then it is a matter of how we can best use, different land resources. With this in mind, then I think, even without the top level support, if it is already built in concept in the planning process, well, I think it is still a good move, well, to push the city, because it is already the blood of the planner, well, when doing the job. So I just add a bit in this. Of course, other discipline equally important to have this kind of knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Tony, for that. A valid comment you made on the need to include the whole concept of underground urbanism at early stages. We have, I think, three ladies here who are all involved one way or the other with universities. Marilu, Shana is working University of Antwerp doing her PhD there, and then we have Antonia as lecturer at ETH. Can all three of you comment a little bit on how the whole idea of using the subsurface or thinking about the subsurface, how that is met by the students? Maybe start with Antonia.
Yeah, is your question related to how they start thinking about it interdisciplinarily, especially, or?
No, just in general.
How they approach
what
it.
What makes them excited about this whole idea, this concept?
I think it's very much sort of what we once called it the final urban frontier. It's sort of Han and I compared in our book as the old settlers going out to find new hunting grounds, and especially also gold at that time in the Wild West. And in our cities, we are so kind of constrained by now, and also we're suffering from congestion in many of the large cities worldwide. So the underground space is sort of a hidden realm, something to be discovered, something to be explored, and something to be excavated, and really there's a lot of potential, I think, that the students feel that where they can use their creative imagination.
Yeah. Shana, how does that work for the University of Antwerp?
Well, mostly when we talk to students about urban undergrounds, like I already said, they think about parking spaces and logistic rooms. And then when you ask them to think outside the box, come on, what else can we do with that space? Then they have this kind of aha erlebnis moment where they see, oh, that's right, we can do several things and it can add value to life above ground. And then when they start Googling, they find all sorts of good practices all around the world, where you connect the surface with the subsurface. And then the things I saw last semester were that they're actually transitioning into something beyond just using the subsurface, but thinking about our reality, our spaces in 3D or in multi-dimensional space. And then you roll into a whole new concept of disconnecting urban design from the ground level, so that you can design on several levels above ground and below ground and connect them by footbridges and create public green open spaces, not just on the ground level, but also on rooftops, on bridges, on there's a whole new world that kind of opens up for them when they no longer think about urban design in terms of the subsurface and what we can build on it, and not under it or through it, or like do something new with the ground level.
Okay, that sounds interesting. So like a multi-level concept, basically. It's yeah, that's good. Marilu, how does it work at your university? When are you the crazy lecturer who dabbles with the subsurface, or is it appreciated in other ways?
I am the crazy lecturer for sure, but I think students really connect very well. I teach subjects like disasters and society, environment and society, and every time we think about floods and fires, we think about the role of the subsurface, right? So I try to embed in multiple topics how the underground actually can help us live a better life in the city, right? So it is not that I come as like the undergrounds are the only thing, right? It's more like there's climate change and it's happening, and what the underground can help us with in this space. There is these different disasters, there's different social pressures, you know, in the cities, like lack of public space, you know, high densities. How can we help the city and their citizens to live a better life? And I think the underground have a very important aspect of it. So in all the subjects I teach, I bring the underground, you know, intensively, constantly. And I think the students appreciate it. And I have PhD students that are looking at underground water infrastructure and thinking with water and trying to explore new methods. And so one of the projects that we've been recently contacted to develop is to develop an augmented reality experience of underground pipes, because that shows how people are really experiencing the city and consuming the services that we have and we need in the urban space. So I think there's multiple spaces in which the university can be very useful in this topic.
Okay, thank you for that, Marilu. And with that, I hand over to Antonia for some closing remarks, because we only have about 3 minutes left, I think, Antonia.
Yes, it was good to hear from the student perspective and teaching perspective. It was really good to have three very diverse, geographically dispersed, but also from their take on the underground space, different perspectives from Marilu, Melo, from Tony Ho from Hong Kong, and from Shana DEBROCK in Flanders. We have pointed out some further sources for you in the chat, joint publications we've done with ISOCARP and joint programs we run with ISOCARP. And I just want to highlight that that's our Young Professional Think Deep program, where we bring together urban planners, geographers, urban designers, architects, geotechnical engineers, and so on, young professionals working together on a case study. And we're actually planning one with Tony Ho in Hong Kong. So hopefully soon travel restrictions lift and we can all descend on Hong Kong and do a great job there together with ISOCARP. And we really want to thank Mahak AGRAWAL, who has curated this session, who has put it all together, and all of you who've attended and who are hopefully now passionate about this subject. We'll be in touch with you, and of course, vice versa. That's possible anytime.
Just
Thanks
one final comment from my side, Antonia. This is our second online meeting on the topic of underground urbanism with ISOCARP. We want to ideally do another one probably at the beginning of next year, and then we use all the input we've had and the dialogue that we've developed to present that at the World Urban Forum, to really try to catch the audience there also with the importance for at least identifying the subsurface as something that needs to be taken into account when it comes to urban planning.
Yeah, and we are very pleased to have gotten this platform on. It's part of the pre-Congress sessions of the ISOCARP Congress in Doha, and we wish you a very successful Congress.
Absolutely. And with that, I think I thank everybody for attending. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to my co-chair Antonia. And I think we can close this session.
Cheers, everyone, and be in touch.